The Law Enforcement Survival Institute and CopsAlive.com welcome you to this Tactical Resilience and Ethical Policing live webcast. Stand by and your hosts will be with you in just a moment. All right. Hello, everybody. I'm John Marks. I'm the editor of CopsAlive.com and the executive director of the Law Enforcement Survival Institute. I want to welcome you to another live webcast from our Tactical Resilience and Ethical Policing project. I am joined today by my co-host, Law Enforcement Survival Institute Associate Director, Carrie Friedman, Law Enforcement Chaplain. I want to do a special shout out to retired Sergeant Mark St. Hilaire from the Natick Police Department outside of Boston, another one of our LESI faculty members. Thanks for being here, Mark. And I want to introduce to everyone our special guest, our formal guest, retired Detective First Grade Mordecai Jacansky from the New York Police Department, who is going to talk to us today about some of his experiences. Our topic today is about managing trauma in law enforcement, and so we thought we would bring out the big guns, literally, and invite Morty to share some of his experiences. By way of introduction, Detective First Grade retired Morty Jacansky is retired from the NYPD, served there with distinction for a number of years. Most specifically, he was working, I believe, Manhattan South homicide at the time of the September 11th, 2001 terrorist attack on the World Trade Center in New York City. As a homicide detective, he responded to Ground Zero and was involved in the investigation, the response, and then the ongoing investigation at Ground Zero. Also, most notably, because of his experiences in dealing with terrorism, he was deployed by the NYPD to Israel from 2003 to 2009, investigating suicide bombings and other terrorist acts in order to facilitate better strategy on the part of the NYPD, which obviously filtered down to all of us. So I won't do all the talking here. Morty, I'm thrilled that you're here with us. We want to hear your story. We want to talk a little bit about trauma. And for all of you paying attention, we're going to talk about trauma in three ways. We're going to talk about prevention, management, and then treatment. But let's kick it off. Morty, would you share your story with us?
Thank you, John, and it's great to see everyone. Hello, Carrie, a familiar face, and everyone else is now a familiar face. I guess my story begins in the fact that I am a first-generation policeman, meaning that when I started in 1983, I had no idea what to expect. I had no idea what the job entailed, other than the fact that policemen carry handcuffs and guns. So my true expectations when I signed up, and the only reason why I signed up is because I didn't want to be an accountant, and that is a true story. Wow. I realized that either I would go to jail or the person whose accounting forms I was filling out would go to jail. So I figured, instead of going to jail, I might as well put people in jail. So I started with the NYPD in 1983. The only thing that was a little bit unique is I came from an Orthodox background. So I came to the police department with a yarmulke on. But I was among 2,000 recruits that year in 1983. So I was different, but very much the same. And I always made sure that everyone understood that I was no better, no worse, just my religious practices were different. So I started having no idea what to expect. Being a native New Yorker, being from the projects, I think really helped me, melt into police work and respect that. I grew up with everybody, so the fact that I was in an environment that encompassed everybody made it very natural for me. There really was no fear or expectations. But the only thing that was different, my second assignment after the academy in 6 months, I went to a real, what they call a house, very, very busy area, which I guess back in the day, most people knew South Bronx or Harlem. I have to have gone to Bedford-Stuyvesant and working midnights, which was very surreal. And I guess the first thing I picked up was the value of human life wasn't necessarily what I was brought up with. So that made, just an impact. But the one good thing I loved about policing, especially in the beginning, I was part of a very big gang. We were the biggest gang in the city. I don't know if we were the baddest gang, but we were the biggest gang. And you had fellow cops with you, and you had your brothers in blue, and I was one of many. We used the nickname Cavalry, uh, something similar, but I had that. So fear was not there. But I did realize that different people have different habits and just live a different lifestyle. I remember my career, I was truly blessed. I knew a foreign language. So the Drug Enforcement Administration, DEA, ate me up right in the beginning. They picked me up after 2 years in uniform, and I went right to narcotics. And again, I'm one of many. So being part of a group sense didn't make it. I just rolled with what everybody else was rolling with. And we never called it quiet practice, but I've heard it been called quiet practice. You go out after work, you have a few beers, and sometimes a few more, then a few more. But you're part of a family, and it's dysfunctional but loving, and we have each other's back. Again, the career was going very swimmingly. I mean, I truly was blessed. I went from narcotics to robbery to general detective, and then eventually to homicide. Now, back in those days, New York was, especially in the late 80s, there was a crack epidemic. There was all these things going on, and everything was routine. Just by doing today's seminar, I actually reflected and I said, was there anything that I was even nervous about or scared about? And it came to me, and I never really put this thought into my head that the one thing I never wanted to see back then was another cop being injured. I didn't know if I had the fortitude, to actually. I worked about three cop murders where I was part of a team. I actually knew one cop who was killed line of duty, who was a friend of mine. But I never had to show up at the scene. It was always post. And again, when if you go to a cop funeral, especially if it's line of duty, you're part of this tremendous group, and you're sharing the grief together. So there's nothing you're really doing on your own. And I just remember everything, you got past it. You thought about it, you thought about the family. But again, the one thing I was always afraid of, because back then I just remember constantly you'd hear the radio false calls. And for NYPD, the call was the 1013, a cop in trouble. And you always said, if a cop was chasing somebody, whatever, you're part of the chase, but that's routine work. But I never wanted to see one shot, stabs, or anything like that, because I just didn't know how I would personally react. And I knew for sure I'd take that with me. But things changed. And I could say 100% that the person who I was September 10th, 2001, and just a little more background, like John had mentioned, I had been elevated to homicide, which was for first generation, it was beyond my wildest dreams. And back then, it's a very callous thing to say, but homicide detectives in Manhattan South, and we covered from 59th down to the Battery, from east to west, were looking for work. When you think about that thing, I mean, we had an office of like 16 guys. And of course, you wanted, you never wanted anyone innocent, what theoretically, like a mob rub out, you know, with the guy with the cigar in his mouth after the fact. It was tragic, but it was something that you could learn to live with, and you'd work the case. But we had, and I hate to use the word, only 20 homicides back then. And I remember leaving work September 10th, 2001, saying, where for an office of our size, some guys might even have to leave just because we didn't have work, and but it was a good thing, when you think in retrospect, in the perfect world there would have been zero. And then September 11th happened, and in my situation, just a little of the big picture, my wife was working. People are familiar with the Trade Center complex right across on West Street, which straddles the Hudson River, is the World Financial Center. And the World Financial Center actually had a bridge, several spots that connected to the North Tower. And my wife was working for Lehman Brothers at the time, and she had gone to work, and September 11th was my regular off day, and I had been home, and we had a babysitter, and my oldest at the time was 2.5. He was actually two, and he was turning 2 on the 18th, and life, my biggest decision: how do I spend the day? And then I got the news about the attack, and it just did not register.
Yeah.
But as soon as I turned on CNN, can't believe I'm saying that today, because back then it was the only alternative you had to find out what was going on in the world. It was beyond belief. And, again, I'm thinking of these thoughts now in retrospect. I was only focused on one person. That was my wife. And I was only focused on one person in particular. That was the mother of my child. That's, all I saw was my wife being the mother and my son being 2. And I couldn't comprehend that possibly, he would be an orphan. And, I was still there, but the whole world was sort of coming to an end. So the initial focus when I heard the attack was, is she okay? And I had a big decision that day. Do I go in? Do I go in? I was getting dressed to go in. But now the attacks continued. My son being by himself, now he has nobody. And I still was going in. And fortunately, I found out right literally as I was leaving the house that she made it out. She actually evacuated her office, and by the grace of God, she survived the event. It's funny because I started thinking then the vision, and I discussed this with John and Kerry, how I wasn't prepared to see what I saw, because the only thing I could even think of similar in our world was the attack in Oklahoma. And in retrospect, that was a news story to me. And I feel terrible today, even thinking back that, wow, how are these guys dealing with it? But it wasn't mine. It belonged to Mid-America. It didn't belong to New York City. And I didn't have envisioned that anything of that proportion could ever even happen. And why would anybody do that in New York? I thought, this was something there. And boy, was I wrong. And that is the infamous day that changed my life forever. And I didn't realize to what extent, because I'm talking to you now from Israel. But again, a couple things I could just think off the top of my head, and everyone's free to ask whatever they like. When I got down there, when I got down to the city, because I lived at that point in Long Beach, Long Island, which was about an hour out from the World Trade Center. I was probably there around 11:30 that morning, between 11 and 11:30. And the visual, to this day, I still say was incomprehensible. I mean, words could not adequately. It's funny because I do lectures all the time. And part of my lecture is I cannot describe, what kind of eyes am I if I can't describe what I saw. But the first thing I could say that's to this day affected me was I was so used to crime scenes and horrific crime scenes, like every police officer all over the country has ever seen, any first responder has seen all over the country, was the surreal aspect that there was really no bodies. Could you imagine devastation? It was like a movie set, but it wasn't a movie. Because there was nothing to even, as we say, work with. And I remember one of the first things we thought we would even have to do that day was make notifications for people who were injured, from the hospitals. And I remember nothing. It's beyond the scope of really any real comprehension. But the worst thing I think, combined with everything else, was as a first responder, was we could basically do nothing, especially in the immediacy of the event. There was nothing to do. Right? And I know I'm speaking among people who never want to feel that way, because that's why we entered our careers to help people. And that was probably the worst aspect, and I remember that was a conscious thought, like, what can I add? I'm only a homicide detective. I never thought I'd actually make that kind of statement. I'm only a homicide detective. I can't offer anything for this. And I would like to think, and sometimes I fool myself, that I said, okay, someday I'm going to fight this evil that's facing us, terrorism or anything, like that. And, I feel like I got plucked by the hand of God to do my assignment that I eventually did, of going to Israel and at least making myself feel like I'm doing something to be a part of this fight. But again, as a first responder, one of the worst things, one of the takeaways, if you can't help, sometimes you get drawn into being not necessarily part of the problem, but we're not used to not helping. That's part of the reason why, at least in my case, I didn't go into this for the money. I would have gone into jewelry or, something, traditional work of my people, but, doctor, no, not after you saw my science scores, no, that would never happen. But, no, so that was a start, and I'm just going to pass back to John, and we'll roll from there.
Thanks, Morty. I appreciate you being so open and willing to talk about this, because I think 9/11 was a traumatic shock to the entire world, but we weren't there and we weren't the ones trying to help. And just hearing your words makes it so powerful about how that would feel, so numbing. But I also, when we introduced you, talked a little bit about that took your work. I mean, a couple of years later, it took your work to continue to investigate suicide bombings on a smaller scale, but also to do intelligence gathering as an intelligence detective, and try to bring that back to New York City and the United States and make the world a safer place. So I wonder if you would share with the group a little bit about that. Also, in the introduction, I didn't talk about your two books. If you have those there, please show us. One book specifically about Morty's life is entitled Terrorist Cop. And then he's written a textbook, thank you. And then a textbook that I'm not remember the entire title. That's why I was going to ask you to hold it up. on terrorist suicide bombings, attack, interdiction, mitigation, and response. Thanks. So I know that you do an awful lot of lecturing now, so I'll let you pick and choose what you think it's important for us to hear, but I want other people to join in this discussion, and I want to talk about, that was one of the worst traumas I think any law enforcement professional could face. And I want to know how you put that to, obviously you put it into your work and now you're teaching others about it. So tell us a little bit about that.
Thank you, John. Listen, one of the blessings, like I said earlier, as far as feeling ineffectual, the worst thing a first responder could feel is they can't help. And once you saw the magnitude of what had happened, and you sort of were hearing as far as, the aspect that the terrorists were from overseas and all these equations, what is a New York City cop gonna do about this? And I truly feel like I got blessed to be picked to go overseas. I'll deal with the immediacy of coming to Israel during and as a result of what happened, I got offered the position to be the liaison, the first overseas liaison, and the spot where they wanted somebody immediately on the ground was Israel, the end of 2002. And because of that, my wife left her job at Lehman Brothers, which was a big decision because, that was where the money was back then. And we picked up, at that point, 2 more children got added. We had twins, and we were basically going to Israel, which is a wonderful country. It's very safe today, but back then was suicide bomb central. So on the one hand, the aspect of feeling you're in the crosshairs by being in New York City, but to go back into the target zone, just says that maybe, I really do need serious analysis, to go from one hotbed to the other.
Yeah.
But the thing that you saw here, at least overseas, were people were living with it. And when I say living with it, there was an aspect of control which was based on mitigation. That's my biggest message that I send, I try to send to the whole world, is this aspect of mitigation. Because, every time you hear that only one person, and I hate to use that word, only one person was killed in an attack, you have to say to yourself, why is only one person being killed? It wasn't because that was the intention of the active shooter or whoever might be the evil behind the barrel or the explosive, or what might be the case. It's because of mitigation. Now, once I got to Israel, I realized that the number one thing, I don't work well off reports. My reading comprehension, my SAT scores weren't that great. So my reading comprehension is really a little bit lacking. So I needed to see it. But there was something very different. I hate to say the fact that there was, it was a horrific crime scene, but it was a crime scene. And there was a certain amount, especially within the Jewish religion, there's so much put into the sacredness of people who pass away. And you saw that people were working so hard that every drop of blood was being picked up. And just if, and I'm going to carry with this, in terms of the holiness of the scene, people were doing something to at least honor and take care of the individuals. But what I realized after that was that it was never going to be the same for me. And that's really where, as I'm getting older now, and again, the fact that I'm able to speak about it today, and hopefully the word gets spread, this is what I need to do. this is what I think we all need to do because we feel compelled. That's why we're on this webinar at this stage of just helping people who aren't exposed to these thoughts, having some sort of at least a shield around them, something to, you can't prevent the shock, but you can at least make them aware that it's possible that it could happen. And I think the one thing about me was naivety. And again, it sounds very silly that as a homicide detective, I was extremely naive. I never expected to be put in this position because nothing I ever did, again, one thing that I was, by the grace of God, I was so fearful of was seeing another cop or someone who I knew very well being one of my victims. I was able to go on. And I'm going on now, but it's a different going on. I could tell you the person I was September 10th and the person I am today are two different people, you know, and I like both of them, but the reason why, you know, it's worked for me is because I feel like I've done something to at least help other people along the way. And, you know, without that, I don't know where I'd be. And again, I was talking with John and Carrie about this, you know, if I was younger, I don't know how I'd be with this. You know, I'm, you know, thank God for my gray hair. It helps me because it's life experience, and it's realizing, you know, I don't know if I'm in the seventh inning stretch yet, but you know, I'm at least in the, you know, in the sixth inning. So it's a different aspect. I just, the one thing I think we all need to do, if we have any voice, is they open people's minds that this can happen. And they need to feel also that it's normal. I mean, because again, first responders were not built for this kind of work. And it could be an active shooter. It could be any sort. The word we have to keep in mind that's different about this sort of work we're involved with, terrorism, active shooter, anything like that, is randomness. Randomness is very, very difficult for the mind to accept. You know, if you have a jewelry store, and I hate to keep going back to jewelry, but there's something of value behind the curtain. So at least you could say to yourself, well, if this person had a better alarm, or they had a trap door, or they were armed themselves, or whatever might be the case, they'd be able to protect themselves. You know, coulda, shoulda, woulda. But with an active shooter / terrorism event, it's just because the person's there. And the amount of general carnage that goes with that is horrible. So we have to, you know, listen, I can't imagine being a New York City cop today and starting the job September 12th, 2001. Because this is what makes me into being who I am. And this is part of, and even, you know, and just to put it, I hate to bring everybody down a little more, but, you know, I just came back from 3 weeks ago going through my full medical based on the illnesses that people are still living, the cancers that people are dying from every single day. You know, it's funny because I'll just sort of move on after just saying this. I'll never forget when I retired, we have in New York City called the heart bill, where if you have a heart condition, you get your pension. It's tax-free and it's a little bit more, whatever. I remember going for a full medical, and this was right after I retired, because you have to submit it right away. And I go to this heart place that does all the guys who are retiring, and the technician comes in and he goes, "I got bad news for you." And I go, "Oh my God, what's wrong?" He goes, "Your heart's fine." I go, "Excuse me?" That's the way we don't think. We have to keep in mind, we don't think like regular people. Because he said, you don't know how many guys are disappointed when they hear they don't have something a little bit wrong with their heart. I go, "Excuse me, I'll keep the good ticker."
Yeah, no
and
kidding.
have have $1,000 less a month.
Yeah.
I'll take it for the long term instead of the short term. It was like but that was something. We're built differently. Anybody who goes into anything that's involving with first responders, and I want to open it up to even more than just law
Well,
enforcement.
let me grab on that for a second. We just had another national news active shooter case here in the United States in Virginia Beach just last week. Shooter went into one of their municipal centers and killed, I believe, 12 other employees. He was a disgruntled, I believe, and a terminated employee. And the police chief came out and said he had some concerns about the mental and emotional welfare of his people because it was a running 10-minute gun battle with the perpetrator. And USA Today came out with a story about that police chiefs nationwide here in the States are concerned because of all the active shooter cases. They're starting to recognize that we have emotional trauma issues. And even when you and I were talking with Carrie about preparing for this, all of us have faced all kinds of trauma, whether it's a dead child or a fire or a massive auto accident or airplane crash. I mean, as you say, it's random. They go on and on and on. And I think every first responder deals with trauma in their own way. And, I don't know that you get extra points for how bad the trauma is. I think trauma is just trauma. So, I appreciate you being willing to talk about this. I want to open it up to some of the other people. I think we all have something to share, but Carrie, did you want to jump in here with some comments?
Sure. Thank you. Morty, thanks for telling that intense story. Your honesty, your openness, we appreciate that. I think that what we've done in the past, this is our 5th webinar. What we do is we will bring some event, something that sparks our curiosity. Then we try to put it into some kind of conceptual framework. So as Morty describes what his experience is, I think that we have to try to distill that into certain questions. The questions that we would ask would be, I think the first question would be, what can we do to better prepare our officers beforehand in anticipation of the extraordinary challenges and the everyday kind of challenges that we know they're going to encounter in the course of performing the law enforcement mission? That's, I think, Morty referred before he talked about prevention. So what can we do to better prepare them? And I think at some point we're going to have to hear from Morty and hear from a lot of the people who are on right now. You all have experiences, but I think the question becomes, that first question as a corollary is it possible if a person is coming in a more robust state of health? What would need to be done? What kind of resources would the officer need to possess? This is my theory. I've seen this. I believe this to be true. It's the basis of all of my training that I provide for officers. But I think that if they come in with a certain amount of resources with them, they're better able to cope with the kind of trauma that they're going to experience. That's my belief. But I would like to hear other people weigh in and hear what you have to say. And I think question number 2 becomes, what can we do afterwards? The treatment stage that I was talking about. What can we do after a critical traumatic incident to support and hasten the healing for those brave men and women who are out there doing the job of policing? What can we do to hasten their return to health? So question 1 is before, question 2 is after. And then I think that one of the things we'd have to discuss is it possible also to distill these universal truths? Morty's talking about, in the course of just listening to his story, and all of you can weigh in and share your stories. There are different kinds of traumas. John just mentioned, he said, I think trauma is trauma. There are certain traumas, there are gigantic, overwhelming traumas. They just, like a tidal wave, they flood the senses, and that's what Morty was describing. But cops every day encounter trauma, the everyday kind of garden variety, which is pretty intense. But the accumulation of that, if you add those together, hundreds of them, thousands of them, inch by inch, every single shift, you put that together. So we might want to ask the question, is it possible, is it true that we can just, the same, let's say, skill sets, the same tools, the same insights, the same attitudes, the same things that provide healing in one case, provide healing in the other? I think those are the questions that are in front of us right now? John, correct me if I'm, please feel free to add to that. I think those are the questions right now that we'd have to come up with to universalize Morty's experience and to provide something which is helpful for officers who are listening to this and the officers whom we counsel and help all the time.
Yeah, I think everybody on the call, so to speak, right now, we're all leaders. Many of us are trainers. There is this concept of post-traumatic growth. And, I think Morty is kind of living proof of that, talking about his maturity and just where he was in his career when this happened. He wasn't a rookie. He'd had quite a bit of experience. He'd seen a lot. He'd managed an awful lot of trauma prior to experiencing September 11th. And, and as you're alluding to, we all acknowledge that health, when it comes to these issues, is a multifaceted thing. We have physical health, we have emotional health, mental health, and spiritual health. And all of those can be enhanced. I think many people on the call train to do that. And certainly my belief that we can manage trauma better when we have done some of the work in advance. Sometimes we just will sort of learn as we go along. And then I think we all acknowledge that no individual can handle it by themselves, that there are components of support that have to be in place. The agency has to be supportive. They can't just tell you to suck it up and get back out there and go investigate another traumatic crime scene. So we need to have support mechanisms. We need to have all kinds of things that we put in place to deal with that. So
just one thing quickly that comes to my mind to add to this. The one thing that was missing in Israel for me more than anything else was not having a partner, a work-related partner, not having. I could say 1,000% that with 9/11 aside, but again, a lot of us were experiencing this together. We were experiencing the moments together. Whatever we were asked to do, we would do. I don't remember doing anything. You do this alone. You really have to capitalize, if that's the proper word, on the partner issue, on having, on not just talking about it or feeling it yourself, but having 2 people at least, 3 people, 4 people, 5 people as part of the equation. Because thinking back to myself, what made this different than anything else that I ever experienced in my police career was the fact that I was really at these scenes alone. And I remember, I always reflect back how I'd be leaving, a suicide bombing, and I'd be driving, let's say I lived an hour away from the scene of where I just spent a horrible 3 hours, 4 hours seeing things that no human being should have to see even once, and calling my old office, and we'd be, shooting the breeze, and I'd want to know who's on the promotion list and who wasn't. It's like, you're talking about this, you're dealing with this, but the normalcy of life sort of left, of just the diversion of being, because they talk about choir practice doesn't have to be in a bar. Choir practice could be in the morning having a cup of coffee, just with your peers, even from a socialization. I would say one of the best things the NYPD does, and you hope more people take advantage, we have organizations that are religious-based organizations like the Emerald Society, the Holy Name Society, the Shaman Society, of people just getting together who have a commonality, who share experiences, and a lot of them the same experiences, but they're also doing it a little bit out of the parameter, of the locker room or anything else. And, we have memorial breakfast, we have parades, we have all these things going on, and it means so much. So that's just one thing that, I just want to throw out here. I realize with smaller agencies, you might not have the same, but you know what? A small agency could also be a part of a bigger group. And you don't even realize how much more you have in common with people. You know, you have more in common than you don't have in common. And as time progresses, I realize that more and more.
Thanks. Mark, did you want to say something?
Yes, I'd like to follow up what Morty's just talking about. What we found is working with groups, critical incident teams, especially those that are trained under the International Critical Incident Stress Foundation guidelines. They find after a lot of incidents, even if it's what they refer to as a diffusing, makes a big, big difference because you're gathering the people that are part of that incident in small groups if it's a large event and stuff, but allowing them the opportunity of just recalling like what they saw at that moment. And a lot of times what happens is things, because of being human beings, we miss, but somebody else may recall that, and now it starts to make sense. It helps click in our brains like, oh, okay, I'm not going crazy. I wasn't hallucinating or something. And then usually on a large scale incident like that, they would continue on to a formalized debriefing, again, where they bring in, a clinician, they bring in clergy along with the peers to slowly go through in steps what happened, what they were doing during that incident. I think that's very, very vital. Morty brought up a real good point about, it's just having somebody to talk to. And from my experience, especially with the younger officers today, we know as cops, there's a lot of cookie breaking that goes on, especially with new cops and when they get into tragic situations or they're investigating things and stuff. And I've found that, this is when mentorship really comes in, or you really distinguish leaders is the ones that are going up to the young people and saying, it's okay. This, what's happening to you right now is totally, you're a human. That it happens to everybody. And I think that really takes a lot of burden off the young people. And I think that's what we also need to really advocate when we're working with our peers is that you're okay. There's nothing wrong with you. You're in an extraordinary situation. And there's nothing wrong with you.
It's funny because this just came to me. One of the most powerful things for me to this day still to hear, and again, I apologize for being so New York centric, but hearing the bagpipes. Because when you hear the bagpipes, it's such a moment of resilience, mourning, continuation of again being a part of something. Because what we do does not make sense to do it if you're not a part of something. It's not logical. Why expose yourself to this? Because it's not day to day of normal existence. But when you're part of a big, and I appreciate it. It just came to me. I just said, I love hearing a religious speech. I really, but one of the most powerful, in the Jewish religion, we have the shofar, which is like the ram's horn, which to this day, at the apex of our holiday season, you hear it, a shrill goes through you. Well, I know when it came to police work, for me, it was the bagpipes. That was the same sort of, you're part of a big group. And again, you're part of an organization, you're part of a brotherhood, of a sisterhood, of a fellowship.
Carrie or Bill, did you want to jump in there?
Did you mean me? Oh, Carrie, sorry.
No, I'd
you
like to
can
hear
go
what
in
other
there.
people have to say. Please, by all means, weigh in.
Thank you guys so much for having me on this call. And Morty, that was both a painful and beautiful recounting of what can happen in 24 hours. And I wrote down some notes as you were talking. What I heard was that sense of helplessness, and how that ineffectual feeling of not even knowing what to do, having it be a slow homicide day, and then go to such a large, earth-shattering change in what's normal, no bodies, nothing to do, is really an important message, because unfortunately, this is the modern operating environment that we're in. And when we're talking about new recruits, public safety recruits coming in, it's so difficult to know how much to prepare them for. There's often no way to prepare them for this, except, as you guys have said, to plant the seeds that will hopefully grow into some form of understanding later for when, not if, we experience some form of trauma that sends us over the edge. And as Carrie mentioned, it doesn't always have to be that big, giant, big T trauma that is your event. It can be the cumulative effects of the smaller T traumas that we never quite know are layering and layering and layering behind the scenes. So I just wanted to say thank you so much. It really just touched my heart. I work with this group of humans, and it's been interesting to see public safety cadets coming in and not yet knowing which agency they wanted to work with. My job is to sort of tell them that trauma will come and that it's normal, and you will see things that are not normal, and that sense of one of many means connection is going to be one of the things that's going to get you through. So you can see the ones in their eyes who get it, and the ones who don't yet get it and roll their eyes. But again, just planting that seed that it's normal, that you're going to feel not good at some point, and we'll do it together. So thank you.
Thanks, T. Carrie or Bill? Oop, hang on, Bill. Let me unmute you. There, I got you.
Am I on?
You're on.
Okay. Morty, again, I also thank you for sharing. I'm going to have to make this kind of brief. Our tornado sirens are going on around here. We have a tornado on. Got to bail out here in a minute. But I wanted to mention there's so many things that I was thinking about. Morty, I worked on the federal side. Unlike you and so many of the other people, I never had, and I mentioned this before, I never, except working tactically, I never had a uniform on. So I always blended in. But one thing I did note, in having seen some very bad situations and ugly situations, and I think you gave yourself short shrift when it doesn't matter how many homicides you get in, when there's an attack on our country like there was at that time. And I recall even being here in the Midwest, we were uncertain as to any follow-up attacks and where they might be. And so the carnage that you were experiencing then, we didn't know what was going to follow. And the stress of that had to just amplify everything that you had gone through before and put it up there exponentially, because you, along with the rest of the folks in law enforcement, were looking at the aspect of, are we going to see this again? And if so, is it soon, and where and when? And that adds a lot of stress in what you have already experienced. And the other thing I wanted to throw out there are the delayed effects, because some of my colleagues that I even worked with here in the offices close to me are have passed away, and because they were there working day after day at ground zero, and there are after effects there. And we just, some of them, we think we can prepare for some of these traumas, these shocks, but there are others, they sneak up on us. And I'm sure you can say quite, if you're honest with yourself, that you have, and where you worked over there in Israel, you don't know when and where it's going to be, and that's something that you didn't necessarily have when you worked the streets in homicide.
It's perfect how you said, and I've never said this together, normal is never going to be normal again.
Exactly.
And that's probably my takeaway. It's funny because we said, I can't be on a bus and look at a bus the same way. I can't be on an airplane and look at it being the same way. It just changed all the word normal doesn't exist. But in my case, again, I was blessed to be able to do something with it. Meaning, right here, this is a perfect example. I don't know, but not every person who's been exposed gets this sort of opportunity. The fact that, if I speak to two people and they have one thing that they take away from it, and they can put it just in their pocket, and compartmentalize it. Like we just said, to take it when they need it, because you never know when you're going to need it. And just say, oh yeah, it's funny because I'll never forget, I was taking a detective class very early in my career in the early 90s, and the sergeant came up and gave a lecture. And he gets to the podium, and there are like 50 of us. And he was investigating computer crimes. And I'll never forget, he said, computer crimes someday will be very sexy. I said, computer crimes, the word sex, like, what does this have to do with life itself? But realizing now just the aspect of just the cyber warfare that's out. It's just, he was so ahead of his time of having that issue somewhere. No, be safe. I feel terrible if you hear the sirens. My God.
No. I'm just, if the trees start waving a little bit more, I'm going to leave.
Listen, I'm available for an hour later, so don't.
Thank you. Oh, no, fine. Go ahead.
No, so again, it's the type of thing where, we're really like we said, we're in a different world, and because we are, it's not just going to. And again, it's soldiers who go up to war, who I don't know what they're prepared for. The ones who go to Iraq and Afghanistan or any of these places, what fortitude they're given. But in their case, I think they're expected to come back with some form of PTSD, of some sort of traumatic. It's like that's part of the program, which is terrible when you really think about it. That's how they enter into their assignments. Like, you will come back with some sort of backlash. Whereas first responders, because it is, I'm saying only a 9 to 5 career, but we all know that it's 7/24. There are things that we will come home to and come home with, and it's just a matter of opening up the possibilities. To me, that's that. If I could just add one thing, it's putting in people's minds when they're starting, and without getting them alarmed or worried, because they'll be okay, because together we're going to get through it. That to me has to be the sort of mantra. That's why I thank God for our leader, because otherwise I wouldn't have met these two guys. and St. Louis isn't the most wonderful place in the world, even though, I am, I guess it's okay.
Now. Mark, your hand is still up. T, I saw you raise your hand. Hang on just a second.
No, that's,
No, it's funny, as Walt was just saying, Bob Douglas, who's the president of the National Police Suicide Foundation, when he spoke one time, he brought up a real good point. He said, going into law enforcement is like going into the military. All the innocence you knew in life is gone. And I believe that's true. And then I don't have the name correctly, so I'm not gonna, but I will quote it. She was the psychologist for the Metro DC stress program, and she said one time, she said that between the military and law enforcement, that she distinctively pointed out, the military goes into battle, and then they come out of the theater and they have time to decompress. Where law enforcement, you're going from call to call to call, and that law enforcement doesn't even get a time to like, what the hell just happened, because you're humping the next call and you're off, you're going and stuff. And so, Morty, you really brought up a real good point about first responders. It's a 24/7. You really don't have time to work it out.
Yeah, 365, year after year after year.
Could I say one other thing relative to what we're talking about? I think we refer to it on duty and then going off duty, but particularly it's noticeable in this day and age, and you brought it up in some of the things that have gone on across the country here stateside, and that is the so-called active shooter situations. I think we all get into a little bit of a zone of hypervigilance anytime we go into a school, a synagogue, a church, or a mosque anymore. And I will freely admit it. Anytime I go into any place like this, I'm always looking at exits, and I'm always looking at who's coming in and who's leaving, and what's going on around me. So the effects are there, like it or not, 24/7.
Yeah. T, you had a comment earlier?
I was just going to say, in regards to this subject of combat veterans and first responders, that I often say for veterans, they go into war and then they come home from the war. And with you guys, the war is now and always. And yet, at the same time, the shattering of what normal meant to each one of us, whenever that happens in the career or on the battlefield, is on the other side of it, leads us all with the same problem. This feeling that we'll never be the same, or that we can't share or can't connect. And so I think I'm starting to, at least I'm seeing a lot of blending in terms of working with this counterinsurgency is what we're talking about, unexpected. You cannot expect or prepare for this new normal, but be able to start talking about it and having the conversation now, so that at some point we can hopefully get cultural competency in our clinicians and people on the other side who are going to be catching these people coming out on the other side, whenever that is. So it's just such an important thing for us to remember that with police work in particular, as you guys have said, you're never off duty, even when you're retired. And so we have to start to build in the ability to be off duty. It's a muscle that has to be created, moved, flexed, and exercised.
Can I just add one thing? And this is actually critical, John. I apologize.
No.
I love how you just explained how I'm speaking with a group whose passion is first responders, this topic. if I was in the middle of my career right now, and let's just say I just wasn't feeling right, and they would say, you know what, go speak to somebody. They have 80 degrees, and not the heat, but degrees on the wall from Harvard and Yale, whatever. Could I tell you, it really, I don't think would be that effective. Because in order for us to interact, this is something either you got it or you don't. There's a reason why we are here. And if we can make any recommendations to any agencies we're dealing with, don't go with degrees, go with passion and knowledge and looking into this topic, because this isn't a normal topic. This isn't something you can learn. You have to, this has to be a passion. And I've never actually even thought about this from this, from this realm that it's not something you can study in school. This has to be something that's on your mind prior to going. If you're going to help the person to give advice, to make the landing a little softer, or this has to be a part of you. So it's a critical thing, and before the person would even start, if they were a psychologist or whatever might be the case, somehow they have to get exposed, and not exposed in terms of actually feeling the incident, but just they really have to, sit down and understand what we're going through. So that's, I've never, again, and listen, these are words I never used to use, but unfortunately I have to use now. It's called thought-provoking. I used to just do things.
Yeah.
Now it's a good thing. Especially as the gray comes more and more. It's as they used to say, a mind's a terrible thing to waste.
Thank you, Morty. Carrie, you've been really quiet. We're at the top of the hour. Do you want to help us do a wrap up?
Sure. I think there are a couple of points that come out. I think that's important. I think we'd be almost irresponsible to finish a conversation like this, which I think this was a great start. I think there's a lot more to be said. But I think that this, I have an obligation to add this piece in. I am remarkably one-dimensional, as John and Bill can attest. Bill's been, now this is his 5th webinar with us. We've had 5 of them, and I keep going back to the exact same idea. So forgive me, but that's what I'm peddling. John, in his book, Armor Yourself, at some point as I'm talking, he'll hold up a copy. He describes in the book, he addresses, he acknowledges, there it is, that within a person, there are a number of different components. There's the physical, the mental, the emotional, the spiritual. The mental breaks down into a couple of different subcategories. There are lots of different ways that we interact on a lot of different planes, and we need to be nourished in all of them. It's not enough to say, well, I work out at the gym, so I don't have to take care of my emotional health. I take care of my emotional health, so I don't have to do something. You have to take care of every one of them. And his book is broken down in a way that he addresses them. What less he does, we take care of all of those pieces. When someone is encountering these kind of emotional, these traumas, I think Mark mentioned the ICISF and other organizations. There's a lot of great work that's done out there, and there are a lot of tools for dealing with the emotional aspect of the trauma. There are other components as well. And what Morty was describing in his remarks when he was talking about what he went through, what you'll notice is that he was also taking a big hit. Trauma occurs in the spiritual plane as well. And so much of a person's resilience, their ability to respond, to grow, to heal, to continue to function, to become better, all of that drama is taking place in the spiritual plane. The word spiritual is loaded, and we don't have time. We're way out of time. But spirituality has nothing to do with religion, but it has to do with the why of what a person's doing. Why are they in law enforcement? What's this all about? Why subject oneself to all of this? The best way to deal with all of these traumas, to anticipate them, is to not go into the career. Just go into some other career. But if a person decides to go into this career, the why brought them, they have a strong why. It brought them into this career. They have the need to be involved in law enforcement, to do good for the rest of, to maintain order, to create order, to distinguish it from chaos, to make the world a safer place, to protect the innocent, to protect the integrity of our justice system. All of that is a very strong why. And if somebody, as Nietzsche once famously said, a person who has a strong enough why can survive any how. In the job of law enforcement, people encounter horrific hows every day, all the obstacles, the challenges, the trauma, the horror. They have to make sure that their why is strong enough. And if a person has, I talk about 3 accounts of spirituality, don't have the time to describe what those are, but a person would have to nourish all of them. If a person goes in to these experiences and into the career with 3 robust accounts of spirituality, they're connected powerfully to a value system, to an absolute truth, like the sanctity of life, or human dignity, or our constitutional system, or whatever it is that connects them, that makes them that what their why is. If they have a healthy account, robust account of regard for other people, and they have a hefty account of confidence in self, so then what they experience, the trauma, because what Morty was describing, he talked about his sense that he felt he could do nothing. He was struck by the randomness of the whole thing. He was, the trauma and the healing was honoring the corpses that were there and helping others. All of those represent either depletions or replenishments into those accounts of spirituality. So while addressing the spiritual side of a cop is not the only thing that needs to be done, it certainly has got to be a component of what happens. So I think there's increasingly more attention to the emotional and mental dimension, psychological dimension, but you have to add to that as well, I believe, the spiritual as well. If you do that, then the person will heal faster, they'll heal better, the healing will be a real one, a substantive one, instead of just a surface one. And if we do that, if we prepare them in that way as well, we honor the why, and we help them strengthen their connection, their awareness of that. I think they'll go into these kind of situations just much healthier, and they'll be able to do a better job in the absence of trauma or in the presence of trauma. All right, that was my piece. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Wow.
All right, Morty, any final thoughts? I agree with Carrie. We can continue this discussion, and each time we do one of these, we kind of bubble up a concept for the next one. And I'm going to suggest maybe we talk about post-traumatic growth, so that we actually really focus on how do you recover, and then how do you prevent in the first place. But Morty, last thoughts, and then I'll close this out.
First, thank you everyone for actually dealing with me for an hour. I know it's a burden, but thank you. No, I'm just honored to be here. And by the grace of God, we are all here taking this into consideration. And without it, again, we'd be lost. And if we're not doing good, this is definitely something where it's better to give than to receive. And the more we give, if I would just stop, and again, I don't know how it happened that I get to do this now. This, again, the fact I have professors who I know who are in this, who unfortunately have passed on, because they would have been 130 by now. And when they hear that I wrote a textbook on suicide bombing, they're saying, this guy couldn't put a sentence together, let alone a textbook. So, but there is a reason why this happened. And, I can't figure it out. I have no idea. But if it helps one person, and this topic now, because as time progresses, you get to see more and more and more and more. I never in my life talked about a bagpiper. I knew people who played in the band, but I never understood hearing the sound, how it affected me. And I want to I thank you for this hour. That without it, this is something I'm going to be thinking about, and you need to think, because if we cease to think, we don't exist. Thank you.
Thank you, Morty. And I say thank you to everyone that's joined us today. A special thanks to retired Detective First Grade Mordecai Jakanski from the NYPD. He's actually calling in internationally to us today. Appreciate you doing that. It's late at night in his time. As Carrie alluded to, a number of us on this call are part of the Law Enforcement Survival Institute faculty. We came together to try to bring the best in the world about law enforcement wellness and resilience and good practices, best practices that would help all first responders and military professionals and, you know, just about everybody on the planet. So we come together. This is the Tactical Resilience and Ethical Policing Project. You found us on tacticalresilience.org, or the website that we have for this project. We have the Law Enforcement Survival Institute.org website also. And we bring an awful lot of written and video information to you on copsalive.com. So we do this about once a month. We post these up on our YouTube channel, which is YouTube.com/copsalive. We will post this one as well. And in about a month, about 30 days from now, we'll host another one of these. We invite you all to come back. We invite you all to tell your friends and come check out the recordings. I apologize. I got a chat message from somebody that was having a very hard time hearing all of us. And so hopefully they will be able to view the recording on our YouTube channel. But thank you all for your time, and I look forward to seeing you here in about 30 days. Stay safe, stay well, take care.
Thank you, John.
All the best, you
Thank
guys.
you, Carrie. Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you for joining us on this Tactical Resilience and Ethical Policing live webcast. Your hosts today were John Marks, the Executive Director of the Law Enforcement Survival Institute and author of the book Armor Yourself, How to Survive a Career in Law Enforcement, and Carrie A. Friedman, law enforcement chaplain and the author of the books Spiritual Survival for Law Enforcement and Wisdom from the Batcave. We appreciate your joining us and invite you to stay in touch with us by visiting either copsalive.com, our training site at lawenforcementsurvivalinstitute.org, or this website at tacticalresilience.org and use the drop-down tab for the online training. Please join us for this semi-regular monthly webcast. You can also find replays on our Cops Alive YouTube channel at www.youtube.com/Cops Alive. Thanks very much. Stay safe and stay well.